Hi, my name is Gautam Sen. I'm an author, a writer, a journalist on one side, and the other side, I'm also a consultant in matters automotive, both concerning historic vehicles, what otherwise is known as vintage and classic cars by many people. So on one side, I do consult and advise on matters concerning historic vehicles. On the other side, actually, my main consultancy work, my main project work is invariably on automobiles to do with the future, with essentially products that I am involved in developing or designing or getting them developed with designers in Europe. So that's my main, let's say, livelihood, my main bread and butter. But I also enjoy very much, let's say, writing and talking about historic vehicles, about classic and vintage cars, which are an important part of what I believe is India's and the world's automotive heritage, cultural heritage of the 20th century. So I'm a part of the Global Automotive and Charters Committee of DLC, the London chapter. It's been 26 years that I've been based out of Paris. Before that, of course, I was in India, and I was born and brought up in India, lived in different parts of the country because my dad was in the army, a doctor. We moved all over, and before I moved to Paris, I spent almost 11 years in Bombay. So my topic that I would be talking to you all about today is essentially historic vehicles and how historic vehicles define the culture and the industrial history of a nation and of the world per se. And how this is not only one side is it a sort of an intangible cultural aspect, it's also as much a part of, let's say, human, let's say, history in the modern 20th century context, now into the 21st century, and how it's also a very good investment at the end of the day, the fact that vintage and classic cars make excellent investment and in fact are a very good alternative, in fact, to art and other collectibles. Let me first explain to you my personal, let's say, journey a bit. I've been, involved, or rather, automobiles has been my lifelong passion. Young people, most young boys in most parts of the world, not just in India, but probably in different parts of the world, I think when they are, since more than 100 years now, since they've been born, they always like playing with little toys, little model cars. Well, and the thing is that, of course, some of these boys grow up to become adults. Some of us don't. Unfortunately, we still keep playing with these little model cars, which I have a fairly substantial collection, as well as larger cars, let's put it that way. And in them, again, whether it's modern, whether it is historic, whether it is vintage or classic, is something which varies from people to people. My passion has been spanning the whole gamut. And in the process, what happened is that I did in terms of my studies, I did my economics and business management in Calcutta, and then in Jamshedpur for business management. And the job that I went looking for, which I really wanted to have as soon as I finished my business management school, was in the automobile sphere. In fact, with Maruti Udyog, 1984, when the company was brand new, when it just started making the Maruti 800. If you remember, the first Maruti 800 had just been launched in late 1983. I joined Maruti Udyog in 1984. And we were, in fact, the first batch of management graduates who joined Maruti at that point of time. And I'd spent a couple of years with Maruti in Delhi and then in Bombay. And that was very, very interesting and exciting at the time when, the whole car scene in India was changing rapidly. And that's what led me to, in fact, after that, to establish India's first automobile magazine, which is called Indian Auto. And I founded that magazine, which was India's first newsstand car magazine. And then subsequently, I moved to the Business India Group. In 1992 and 1993, we launched Auto India, which became, in fact, the largest selling automobile magazine. So since Auto India came into existence, several other car magazines came by over the years. And I, in fact, left Auto India to start Automotor and Sport, which is a German magazine, the leading European magazine, in fact. And then subsequent to that, I went back. I launched, in fact, BBC TopGear's, the TopGear magazine in India for the first time, which was launched in 2005. And now, well, all these magazines are, Print magazines are not anymore in vogue. I edit, in fact, e-magazine called Derivas and Knives, which is fairly new, essentially the historic vehicles fair. And so one side I keep editing and writing and, in a journalistic way. But more than anything else, I also write books. I've been writing several books. And in fact, they are always obviously automobile connected. Now, we don't use the word vintage or classic cars because that's very, very English. Vintage, as you know, in Europe, is essentially refers to wine, not to cars. Or in certain parts of the world, in fact, in Germany, they use old timers and young timers for automobiles. In France, they use vehicle ancien. So there's a lot of confusion, let's say, when you especially talk about vintage and classic cars in the rest outside of England, rest of the world context, and which is why it's now the commonly used terminology is historic vehicles. Now, in terms of historic vehicles, the world has been changing a lot. That's an important part, as I was mentioning, about the history of different nations. As you know, when the automobile came in, it started changing various parts of the world, various nations, various cities. And over the years, as you know, that things have changed drastically. The landscape has changed. The way buildings are made, the fact that you need parking space, you need to have garage next to your houses. In the old days, you had stables, but now you have garages for cars. So things have changed in a way that it has impacted our lives in a way that we don't imagine. If you imagine what life was like 140, 150 years ago, and what it is today, it's changed a lot. You can today just get into your car, go and do a shopping, go to another part of the country, to travel, to drive, to enjoy, to meet people. That kind of freedom was not available, or not that kind of, let's say, mobility was never available. And you did have horse carriages, and you had horses to take you somewhere. But those were essentially for the privileged few. In India, we had bullock carts that took a damn long time to get wherever you had to get to. So the automobile has changed that completely. And you just have to kind of sometimes probably go into a countryside in some part of a remote part of the world and then not have an automobile, and then realize how it is to live life. Now, the automobile could be anything. It could be a two-wheeler, it could be a moped, it could be a scooter, it could be a car. It could be you want to go and get your salt in a truck. That's also a possibility. So, but the fact is that it has had huge impact. Of course, at the end of the day, everyone will reduce it to saying that it is essentially a commodity, a product. That for many people, an automobile is just a commodity. It's a way of getting from point A to point B, and no more. Yet, it's different from other commodities. I'm not sure I've heard of anybody getting excited about, let's say, a refrigerator, or getting very excited about a washing machine, or wanting to preserve old washing machines, or wanting to buy old refrigerators. Maybe a few old refrigerators, yes, maybe an occasional one. But automobiles is a totally different thing. It's something where you are not only, let's say, being able to move around with it. Not only is it useful for you, it also has a certain sports. There is sports, there's racing. Nobody goes racing a washing machine. So you have racing on one side, you have motorsport on one side. You have other kinds of events. For historic vehicles, there are events like Concours d'Elegance, there's rallies, there are other kind of meets where people get together, get to meet each other, exchange information on the cars, do things in a social way. The automobile gives you a certain social sense and a social, let's say, interaction, which is not possible with any other product. And that in itself changes, let's say, the use of an automobile. And in that sense, sometimes also the uses of, or let's say the symbolism or the importance of automobiles, which are older, because they either remind you of your childhood, they remind you of your times when you were young and when you had, different, let's say, perspective to life. So all of this has an impact, and that's the reason why an automobile today is something that goes beyond being just a product or a commodity. And why people today have a tendency to also want to go and buy some of these older cars, restore them, or if they've had them in the family, take care of them, preserve them, and it becomes a part of a family's history, a part of your history, a part of you are who you are. So the automobile, in fact, the historic vehicles, the classic car or a vintage car has also become a sort of, let's say, a status symbol, a way of reflecting who you are, what you aspire to be, or what your tastes are like. What is happening is that over the years in different parts of the world, and especially in countries like Europe, of course, most of the countries in Europe and in North America, which has been wealthier, which has had a long history of the automobile, do believe that an automobile in terms of the historical perspective also has an important role to play, which goes beyond being, let's say, compared to that of art. So what's happening is that people are also not only are demanding and looking for older vehicles, they also see that in preserving them, not only is a part of the history of, let's say, your own self or of society or of a certain part of mankind is being kind of propagated, being saved up. And that's the reason why the automobile today has taken on, let's say, a role beyond being just a commodity and being essentially a form of art in a way. And especially the rarer ones, the very special ones, the ones which are either very, very special in terms of being extremely expensive, or were very rare, or were beautifully constructed, or were technologically a milestone vehicle, or were even milestones in terms of society, a common vehicle, a car like a Volkswagen Beetle, or let's say the Maruti 800, the first of the Maruti 800s, or even the early cars that we had in India, like the Premier Padminis and the Ambassadors. They also have all the significances. And as they disappear and there are fewer and fewer around, people want to preserve them. And as you preserve them and as you trade in them, the values have been going up. To the extent that today, the automobile, and especially in terms of auctions, as great, let's say, if not greater than art. And in that sense, that's what is an interesting thing that's been happening, is that the famous auction houses like Sotheby's or Bonhams have an automobile division. And on the other side, you have Bonhams, for instance, who do have automobile auctions, which today, in many of these cases, is as important, almost as important as art. I'll give you the example of Art Curial, which is the leading auction house in France, which, in fact, in their case, today, automobile is on par with art and constitute almost 3/4 of the total auction businesses. They do auction other things, sculpture and photography and even wine and stuff like that. But automobile and art constitute more than 70% of their activities. And of this, it's half-half, 35% almost is art, 35% is automobiles. As some of the vehicles will get rarer, as they are more difficult to, let's say, retain them, maintain them, take care of them, the values go up. And with the values going up over a period of time, as more and more people today are more and more interested in historic vehicles and they want to acquire them, there is the fact that there is a limited number available. The values have gone up to a point where the historic vehicle, let's say, activity or business worldwide is in the region of 44 billion euros or more. It could be up to as much as 50 billion euros, in terms of dollars, even more so, globally. Today, there are vehicles which are trading for as much as $30-40 million. There are these Ferraris. One car is reputed to have traded for more than 100 million. A particular car from Mercedes-Benz went for apparently a price of more than 100 million very recently. And so in that sense, they do make very good investments. And unlike your art, where you are buying a piece of art and putting it on a wall, and you have only people coming to visit you who see them, see this piece of art, automobile, you can take it to your, to whoever you're going to meet that evening. That's a big difference. And of course, the fact is that there are several events, there are all kinds of events happening all around the world, whether they're rallies, whether they're concours d'elegance, where you can participate, take your car there, and maybe you win a prize or two. If you win a prize, the chances are that the value of the vehicle goes up even more so. So in that sense, automobiles make great investments. There are auction houses now in India. In fact, J. Rivers and Ives, a magazine that I run, we have a sister setup, which is also an auction house, and it's also auctioning of cars. And in that sense, in the process, we do expect that if you are looking for today a historic vehicle, there are these people and places and institutions are available that can help you find an appropriate vehicle in which to invest. And of course, on one side, there is the aspect of investment. The other side is the aspect of the cultural impact. And that's where when I say we, I'm saying I'm also a vice president of a body called the Fédération Internationale des Véhicules Anciens, which is basically the International Federation for Historic Vehicles. It's the body that is common to, that is representing the historic vehicle movement worldwide with, and FIFA, as FIFA, we interact a lot with UNESCO. We are in process of, let's say, getting the automobile recognized as intangible cultural heritage of mankind, as much as is, let's say, historical monuments. So with that in mind, we have been working towards that. All the more reason we believe that historic vehicles have a very important, let's say, role to play in the history of every nation, including that of India and all the other nations, important nations in the world, and should become a part of, let's say, our cultural heritage. So how does one go about getting these historic vehicles? Now, that's an important aspect. It's not like going and getting also a brand new car from a showroom where there are enough advertisements and enough other, let's say, literature available. There are, of course, magazines in India, some of which are edited, and I'll tell you all about which one is a good one, which one is a bad car, which one is a better car, comparison tests. That, of course, unfortunately, is not available as such offhand when it comes to historic vehicles. But if you really want advice and if you want to do it right, I think it's best to go to specialists because it could be different requirements. Somebody could want to just invest in a car and leave it there. Somebody would want to take a car and be able to use it, in which case you have to look at the usability of the vehicle, usability depending on the weather, because there are cars which are older cars which don't have air conditioning systems. You can't use them in summer. So these are the main points. I think after that, beyond that, actually, I would still say that specialists are the ultimate way to. I should also take this opportunity to, of course, thank Jimmy Mistry for having put together this wonderful forum and this wonderful way by which people can get to know how to, let's say, invest their money better. And let's hope that we have many more such talks to make these things more interesting and exciting for everybody. Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks very much for this.